Hi, welcome to Minority Matters. I'm your host, Sylvester Smith. And this month we are actually taping on location. We are at the Central High National Historical Site, and our topic is something very important. We're going to be discussing the history of the Voting Rights Act and whether or not voting rights are something that are still relevant or important today, or if they're just something that's guaranteed. I have a great panel today, and starting out is Miss Joanne Bland. She is the co-founder of the National Voting Rights Museum and Institute in Selma, Alabama. Mr. John Kirk, he's a professor of history at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. Dr. Terry Richard Richard, he's a professor of sociology at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. And finally, Mr. Inamini Ekong, he is the Chief of Education and Interpretation at the Little Rock Central High National Historic Site. So thank each and every one of you for joining me today.
Nice to be here.
It's always a pleasure to have you here.
Excellent.
I want to start with you, Ms. Bland. Tell us about the history of the Voting Rights Act and what was going on in our country during the time that the act was passed.
Please remember that I was a kid when this was happening, the fight itself, and I grew up during that particular time and participated. I really didn't understand the implications of how it would apply to me later in life. My grandmother used terms like getting our freedom, and with that, the right to vote would allow us to do these things. And as a kid, I wanted to sit at this lunch counter, and one day my grandmother noticed me staring in the window at the white kids sitting at the counter, and she leaned over my shoulder and she said, "When we get our freedom, you can do that too." I became a freedom fighter that day because I wanted to sit at the counter. The connection with voting rights didn't connect with me till much later. We marched to the courthouse, and I knew that in order to achieve that freedom, we had to be in the political arena, and that we would march to the courthouse, and the youth wanted to participate too, because we felt like we were doing our part. Things were really, really, really different then. As an African American in the United States, I couldn't do a lot of things. And as a child, I wanted to do those things just like the white kids. And when we got the right to vote, it culminated with that march from Selma to Montgomery, which was not an easy thing. Most people think that we just marched for the right to vote. But the catalyst was the death of a young man named Jimmy Lee Jackson in a small rural town just west of Selma. And Selma being the largest city in that area, which had a population of about 35,000 then. All the rest had double digits, or maybe single digit population. So they converged on Selma, which was the place to be. And in Selma, they had been organizing around the right to vote for over 30-some years with the formation of the Dallas County Voters League. So the groundwork was already laid. And then in '64, they sent a letter inviting Dr. King to Selma, the Dallas County Voters League did, to come and help, and he accepted the invitation. Most of our children think that Dr. King came in January, and by August we had the Voting Rights Act. That was years and years of struggle. It just didn't start in the 60s.
Now, let me turn to our resident historian, because as Ms. Bland said, she was a kid, 11 years old, I believe, when she got involved in this movement. But tell us from a historian's perspective, what was going on in the larger political climate at that time?
Mm-hmm. Well, voting rights have been denied for a long time. The 15th Amendment had been passed during Reconstruction. It had been almost 100 years, coming to 100 years since it had been enforced. So in the broader political spectrum, the civil rights movement had been underway already leading up to the Voting Rights Act. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had been passed the year before to help the desegregation of Lynch counties and do lots of other things. So the civil rights movement had already been in full flow and had been focusing on desegregation of facilities and all those kinds of things. But voting rights was one of the last big barriers to full equality for African Americans, and a pivotal one as well, particularly in those deep south states of the United States, where there was a large African American population, yet a minuscule amount of the population were registered to vote. And that prevented African Americans from not just voting, but also holding office, from those basic points of power like school boards and sheriffs and all those kinds of things, that African Americans couldn't have a say in those roles. So you had big, predominantly African American counties, but with white sheriffs and white school boards and white power figures of authority. So the Voting Rights Act was one big way of starting to change that, not just symbolically, but also on a practical day-to-day basis, how communities were controlled and who held power in those communities. So it was just the start of a huge campaign, grassroots campaign, to transform those local communities.
Now, you mentioned that the civil rights movement had been going for many years prior to this, and here we sit at one of the key sites in that movement. I call it Holy Land almost for the civil rights movement. Mr. Ekong, would you talk a little bit about what happened here in 1957 and the important role that that played in furthering the civil rights movement nationally?
Well, after the Brown versus Board decision in 1954, you then have the city of Little Rock taking on a task, something that had virtually been ignored. From 54 to 55, there's no movement on integration. We then go into 56. Once again, there isn't any movement on integration, and so the state of Arkansas, particularly the city of Little Rock, takes on the task to implement and put into action the Brown versus Board decision. And in doing so, you have a group of students who are adamant about education and education only. There's a list put out, and that list gets dwindled down because of various measures to ensure that the students that enter Central High, which was intentionally built in the 1950s to be an all-white institution, an all-white school. And so you find that these 9 African Americans, originally there was 10, or I would even venture to say that there were at least 150 to 200 that initially signed up before other measures ultimately weeded them out. And media does a phenomenal job of putting on display what happens when 9 students seek an education at an all-white institution. And tattooed on the outside of the building, the words ambition and opportunity ultimately become a stark metaphor of what ultimately challenges these 9 students as parents and other individuals in the community try to maintain what was then de facto segregation.
Well, let's talk a little bit, and I'm going to open this up to anyone on the panel. Let's talk a little bit about the differences between these majorly African American schools and the majorly white schools like Central. I mean, because we hear in kind of conceptually that separate but equal meant separate but unequal. I mean, do we have any anecdotal stories that we could relay about the differences?
I integrated our high school in Selma, along with 7 others. And the black schools at the time, I came from going to a school that was, the janitor had to put the coal into the furnace in the basement to heat up the school that never got heated. We had no books. I received my first new book, I should say, when I started school at the white school. I didn't know there was an animal that was a new book. That we always received the books after they had used them like 4 years, and they got new textbooks. Then they passed the old textbooks to us. I guess, is that separate but equal? They had a tennis court at Parish High, which was the name of the high school, but R.B. Hudson High, the black high school, didn't have it at all. They did a yearbook every year. We had 2 yearbooks at Hudson High, its entire 20-year existence.
Oh, wow.
2, and they were paid by local black organizations. Band uniforms. I remember my sister telling the story of, she was the drum major at R.B. Hudson High School, and the white high school gave us their uniforms, and of course our colors were different. And they were expected to wear them, and they rebelled. So there were lots of difference. Nothing was equal about that at all, nothing.
Yeah. I was going to say that, because I don't want to forget the Latino community. There, many areas of the Southwest of the United States really didn't have an African American community. The structure of desegregation and ultimately the segregation of communities was a Latino versus white. So in many cases, when the Voting Registration Act occurred, it actually opened up the doors for many Latinos as well. Because in many cases, particularly like say in Texas, South Texas, there's never been a white mayor, a Mexican mayor. There's never been anybody on the school board. They didn't have anybody on the fire station. And all of a sudden, it really began to change dramatically. And I can tell you that somebody that grew up in Houston, at 18, I remember seeing a voter registration booth, and I went over to register, and they said, that'll be $5. And I'm going, you can forget it. I wasn't going to register for $5. So that the structure of even trying to register really favored, a very much more of a propertied, wealthy class who still exert an inordinate amount of power in our society. And we can see that's one of the things we're dealing with right now when we deal with the voter ID area. And I did want to say that the history of the United States has always been one of traditionally looking at ways, despite resistance, of expanding the rights of those that live here to participate. So initially it may have been just propertied whites, and then ultimately, with the 14th, it becomes African American males, although lots of laws begin to restrict it, but ultimately they begin it. Then we have the right for women. Then ultimately we begin to try to open the doors for more and more individuals to participate by breaking down those barriers of the poll taxes, grandfather clauses, all the things that stop us from it. And now we're dealing with the vestiges of ways where the Republican Party is looking at mechanisms of shrinking it, of actually voter suppression, of preventing individuals instead of expanding it, which has actually been, when you look at all the fights we've been through, that it has been in a gradual attempt to ultimately achieve Martin Luther King's dream of ultimately all of us sharing together, not looking at color or money or whatever, that all of us have this opportunity as Americans to exert our constitutional right. And then all of a sudden now we have efforts to stop us, to prevent us from actually voting. And we have the lowest voter participation rate of any industrialized country in the world. So instead of trying to expand it, opening up avenues in which we can actually have a part in our democracy, efforts are being made to reduce that, to prevent us from actually exerting our right to constantly vote for whoever we like. So it is that we're really experiencing a real challenge. What we grew up through was, I keep saying, a very, very hurtful, a very, very challenging period of our society. But now we're faced with another real challenge, and one that all of us have to really get involved in.
Well, let's go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, and to that point, because what's little known in our history books is that the impetus for the Brown versus Board was the Mendez case in California. Speaking to the point of Latinos, that the Thurgood Marshall worked on that case, and then that ultimately became the groundwork leading up to Brown versus Board, which led to Little Rock. And to Joanne's point, I also think when you're talking about the differences, that the media's propaganda was around race mixing, but at the brass tacks, the integration was about resources. That had there been equal resources, we may not be having a conversation about integration. And so while the media kind of brought about an uproar about this being a mixture of cultures and things of that sort, most segregated African American schools were looking for equitable resources, laboratories, football stadiums, equipment, books. And in most cases, many of the professors that were in all black schools were highly qualified. Most educators you would find were PhD educated, but because they couldn't get employment in the mainstream, they were relegated to the schools, and most African American children were well equipped going into that secondary education.
That's a pretty interesting point that you made about the quality of the education that these minority students were getting. In some ways, when you look at at least with regard to the education of their instructors, you could argue that in some ways it was superior to what some of the white students were getting. Because I remember my mother talking about being educated in segregated schools in Louisiana, and when she referred to her teachers, it was often Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so. Right. And I was educated in an integrated school system that was pretty financially well off. And I can't remember not one of my teachers being referred to as doctor, but I know that that's an aside. I certainly don't want to come across as being someone that's a proponent of segregation in any way, shape, form, or fashion, but that is an interesting thing that you should note. You look like you want to add something.
I did. He also made an interesting point that it's often left out of discussions when we talk about this. The fact that it wasn't just a black act. Most people think it just helped black people, but it helped this nation. Yeah. You're right. Lots of people, poor people of any color, were not going to pay $5 to vote. That was and that leveled the playing field so that we could participate in that democracy. And then now we're fighting this battle again.
Well, I'm going to ask Dr. Richard to take off his LULAC hat for a moment and put on his sociologist hat. Don't you have to concede that most of the lack of participation in the electoral process by all Americans, cross culture, is just about a lack of personal motivation to go vote?
Well, in some ways I think there's a real problem with the disenfranchisement of many elements within our society where they really don't feel they have a stake in getting involved in the process. In many cases, how we elect our individuals, or if you have to go to caucuses to have individuals placed on a slate. I mean, in many cases, it's just I'm not too sure exactly who is voting or who is going to be the candidate. And so there's a lack of involvement in terms of, from a grassroots level, really determining who is going to be in these areas. And then there seems to be a lack of information sharing with the general public to say, what are the key political issues here? How does that actually affect you? And in fact, it seems that individuals are much more likely to be influenced by, by social media that just tends to be very, very flashy. It can be very entertaining, kind of info entertainment, but it doesn't really provide any really substantive understanding of some of the real issues that face American society. And for that reason, by the way, it's one of the reasons we have a problem with Americans actually understanding climate change is real. And we have how many millions of Americans, or we have, for social scientists, I remember being interviewed on a conservative radio station, and they asked me about an issue about Americans being confused about some issue about it was so silly, and I went, that should be no surprise to social scientists. I mean, you have millions of Americans who think that Obama is from Kenya and he's a secret Muslim. And they cut me off. They didn't want, it was like, bang, we don't want anybody to hear that. And meaning that allowing these kind of political perspectives continue to be unchallenged, and a lack of information to really, get at the sources. And there are rationales behind that, but it's a rather disturbing.
See, I would argue, and I think that anyone in the audience who has watched TV in recent months would agree, that the candidates are putting out a lot of information about the issues and what issues should be important. I'm going to turn to our other academician and ask you for an objective answer as our historian. When did people, especially minorities, who fought so hard to get the right to vote just stopped turning out the way that we used to?
Well, there's important historical dimensions to all of this, and Terry was talking about the expansion of the franchise, but of course at every time it's been expanded there's also a history of resistance too, and Central High School is a great example of the resistance to change that happened. So although there's been continual expansion, there's been resistance at every point, and that history of resistance is an important part of that as well. And so many different barriers were used to prevent African Americans from voting. In Arkansas, it was less the literacy tests and all those kinds of things, more the all-white party primaries that the Democratic Party had that stopped African Americans having to say in that party, which was the dominant party in Arkansas. So there's a whole ream of different things that stopped African Americans from voting. But there's also a historical dimension to people who don't vote. And one of the big tasks after the Voting Rights Act was passed in many places was just to educate African Americans about having the franchise, because numerous generations of African Americans hadn't voted. There was no culture of voting. So just to educate people about the vote itself and what it's like and show them a ballot. There's almost 80 years or 100 years where people hadn't had the vote, so they didn't have any point of reference. So it often took voter education campaigns. Of course, one of those was run by Wiley Branton, a native Arkansan who was instrumental for the Southern Regional Council in running voter education campaigns across the South in the 1960s. So education is a crucial part of that, and employing a culture of political engagement, because a lot of people who've been disfranchised for many years, who feel disfranchised from the system, feel turned off by the system, don't feel they have a role to play, don't feel that their voice is being heard. So education and continually engaging people in the electoral process and making sure that they feel their voices are being heard is an important part of that, because if your voice isn't being heard, why would you participate anyway?
No, I guess that's a fair point. But back to Dr. Richard, your point about the Voter ID Act and your suggestion that it disenfranchises voters. Help me understand how a requirement to have an identification disenfranchises voters here in Arkansas, especially when that identification would be provided to you for free in any county courthouse. And secondarily, when it doesn't matter what you're doing in life, even if all you're doing is cashing a check, don't you have to have some form of ID anyway?
Yeah, but one is in the state of Arkansas, not all IDs are accepted. Ironically, if you have a concealed gun carrying permit, they'll accept that, by the way, as a way to vote, which is, as opposed to saying having a Medicare little certificate, which it would indicate you're receiving Medicare, a federal government. They won't accept that.
But that doesn't have a picture on it, does it?
No, but again, that's the whole point. In some cases, the individuals don't have those photo IDs, either because they've gotten old enough or they don't carry those that type of IDs. And then you're really getting away from the real point, which is every American, we should make it easy for any American to actually vote. And what has occurred has individuals, political party, has made it a point to try to create an artificial argument that somehow, because most of us have photo IDs, those that don't, they don't have a right. If they're too lazy or what, but we're talking about disabled, we're talking about elderly, we're talking about disproportionately more likely minorities, probably Latinos and African Americans that were born in areas where they don't have birth certificates to identify and get those photo IDs. Those individuals are Americans. They have a right to vote.
We only have about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to interrupt you. And I'm having to play devil's advocate here because no one here is for this type of concept. But I'm going to disagree with you here on one point. Would you not agree that every living American who is who they say they are has a right to vote? And what's wrong with an America where you have to just prove this is who I am? Because you have to admit that we have documented election fraud here. The most highly advertised case was that of Hudson Hallam, a state representative who bought people's votes with chicken and vodka. That's what he was convicted of. So how do we know that there wasn't another conspiracy that even he had that says, go get Joe's name off of the tombstone over here and go in and vote for him?
Those are some of the arguments that for this type of voter suppression. And it is no doubt that in the past, in American past history, we've had examples of dead people voting, and we've had examples of multiple ways of groups coming in and getting paid for it. Now, there's no guarantee that, in fact, it's happened in Mississippi where the Republican challenger to Thad Cochran is saying that, Thad Cochran was paying African Americans to vote for him, which turns out that there's no evidence that that is the case. But those are what I call the fraudulent, artificial arguments to try to make voter suppression somehow legal, and it is not. We should be looking at mail-in votes. We should be looking at increasing absentee voting windows. We should be looking at if somebody wants to vote and they don't have their voter registration, they can vote. They can go down and get it at the election thing, and we are not doing that.
We're about out of time. Ms. Bland, you're our out-of-state guest. I'm going to give you a closing statement to talk about this important issue, and then we'll wrap things up.
I first like to add that I agree with everything he's saying. Instead of making the process easier, we're making it harder. And all those things are still happening. I think it's going to be our youth who make it right. I think we're going to always get bogged down in the arguments and the craziness.
Well, this has been a very interesting discussion. I want to thank each and everyone on the panel. I especially want to thank Ms. Bland for coming in and sharing her experience and for the commitment and sacrifice that she made as an 11-year-old girl participating in the civil rights movement and marching into the headwind for the rights of others. The right to vote is something that's very important, it's sacred, and it's something that everyone should attempt to exercise, especially in the coming weeks and months. With that, I'll see you next month. Great show, guys.